It was meant to be a high-profile women's leadership panel in Washington, D.C., bringing together some of the most prominent voices in politics, philanthropy, and media. Held at the Kennedy Center, the auditorium was packed with journalists, activists, and diplomats, all gathered under the shimmering glow of chandeliers to discuss the evolving role of women in shaping global policy. A sense of expectancy filled the room, not just for the content of the panel but for the personalities involved. The spotlight grew brighter when former First Lady Melania Trump made her entrance, flanked by security and a small entourage. She wore a cream-colored coat dress, her signature style on full display. Photographers clicked rapidly, capturing every angle as she offered her usual reserved smile and nodded subtly at the polite applause. Not far from her seat on stage sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising political force from Texas known for her sharp wit and bold, unfiltered presence in Congress. Dressed in a tailored electric blue pantsuit, she was already deep in conversation with fellow panelists, radiating energy that made her hard to ignore. While Melania's arrival was met with deference, Jasmine's presence commanded attention in a completely different way. It wasn't the flash of cameras, it was the magnetism of conviction. The two women had never shared a stage before, and even though no words had yet passed between them, the contrast in their personas created an invisible current of tension that crackled in the air. As they were seated just 2 chairs apart, polite nods were exchanged, but there was a stiffness between them. Melania crossed her legs with careful precision and adjusted her gloves, while Jasmine simply leaned back and smiled, exuding confidence that didn't require a performance. The panel moderator, a respected political journalist, welcomed everyone and introduced the first topic: what does modern womanhood mean in a world of changing leadership? Melania was the first to speak. Her voice, calm and measured, spoke of grace, elegance, and knowing one's place in the fabric of society. Her tone wasn't hostile, but it carried an underlying sense of judgment. She referenced her time as First Lady, emphasizing how she avoided loudness and confrontation, focusing instead on being a calm and guiding presence. The words floated through the auditorium like perfume, polished, soft, but unmistakably pointed. The subtext didn't go unnoticed. Several attendees exchanged glances, as if trying to confirm with each other whether they'd heard what they thought they had. Jasmine sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. The moderator then turned to her. The audience leaned in slightly, sensing that the dynamic was about to shift. Jasmine began by thanking the panel and acknowledging the many forms of leadership, but it was clear from her tone that she intended to push back gently but firmly. There's power in presence, she said, but there's also power in voice. Women today aren't just symbols, we're strategists, we're fighters, we're frontline decision makers. The audience responded warmly, clapping and nodding in agreement. Jasmine's cadence picked up as she spoke about the battles women of color face, having to defend their intelligence, their tone, even their right to speak. We are often told to shrink ourselves in the name of civility, she continued, but some of us don't have the luxury of silence. It was eloquent, it was grounded, and it hit home. Melania maintained a composed expression, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She offered a tight-lipped smile as Jasmine finished, but her eyes had cooled slightly. She seemed poised to respond, her lips pressing together in a way that suggested she wasn't used to being challenged so directly. The room buzzed with a silent electricity as the exchange set the tone for what would become a headline-making moment. It was no longer just a panel. It had become a stage where two vastly different ideologies about womanhood, power, and voice would clash before a live and deeply invested audience. And while both women remained composed on the surface, anyone paying attention could tell something was brewing. The discussion moved swiftly into its second phase, shifting toward political responsibility and the role of public figures in shaping national narratives. The moderator, sensing the audience's growing engagement, posed a more pointed question. In an age where social media, activism, and visibility are intertwined, how should women in power use their platforms, gracefully or forcefully? The question hung in the air for a moment, loaded and deliberate. Melania Trump adjusted the microphone in front of her and leaned in with a practiced elegance. She began her response with a soft smile, saying, "I believe that grace is power. Sometimes, the loudest message is silence. I've always chosen dignity, not drama." Her words were calm, her voice barely above a whisper, but the implications rang loudly in the room. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some nodded in agreement, appreciating her composed approach, while others stiffened in their seats, recognizing the subtle dig directed at the more outspoken women on the panel. Jasmine Crockett, seated just 2 chairs away, kept her gaze steady on Melania as she spoke. There was no sign of irritation, only a slow blink and the faintest arch of an eyebrow. When it was Jasmine's turn to speak, she didn't hesitate. She began by acknowledging the many forms of expression women have used to claim space in the world. Some people inherit their microphone, she said coolly. Others have to build it from scratch. The audience stirred, murmurs rippling through the rows. Jasmine wasn't speaking with volume, but with precision. Her words had an edge sharpened by experience. She detailed the reality of women in politics who have to fight not only against policies but also against perception. When you're a black woman in Congress, she said, you're expected to be polite even when your rights are under attack. You're told to smile while being dismissed. But I wasn't sent to DC to whisper. I was sent to speak. Thunderous applause followed, especially from younger attendees who stood and clapped enthusiastically. The moderator tried to maintain neutrality, but even she couldn't help but nod in agreement. Melania shifted slightly in her seat. The corners of her mouth curled into a smile, but there was no warmth behind it. She reached for her mic again, and this time her tone was less gracious. Well, she began, pausing just long enough to draw attention. I suppose yelling on television is one way to get attention. I prefer dignity. That's how I was raised. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. It was no longer subtle. The insult was direct, and everyone knew who it was aimed at. Several audience members turned to each other in disbelief, as if trying to confirm that they'd really just heard what they thought they had. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on Melania, her expression unreadable. The entire room seemed to freeze in anticipation, a silence so thick it seemed to suck the oxygen from the space. It was the kind of silence that comes before an earthquake, unnerving, still, expectant. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, every shift in body language. The moderator looked momentarily stunned, then tried to pivot the conversation with a question to another panelist, but no one was listening. All eyes were on Jasmine, waiting to see what she would say. Even the other panelists leaned slightly forward, caught between discomfort and curiosity. Jasmine's hands were still folded in her lap. She took a slow breath, tilted her head slightly, and then leaned toward the mic. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Phones were raised. Livestream numbers spiked. Everyone could sense something unforgettable was about to happen. In that one moment, the entire audience, physically present and digitally connected, was holding its breath. The lighting above shimmered faintly as if leaning into. Even the stage crew in the wings had stopped moving. No one moved, no one whispered. This wasn't just a disagreement between public figures, this had become a defining cultural moment. 2 women, 2 worlds, and one stage that had suddenly become the center of a national conversation. The tension, now thick and electric, hovered like a summer storm waiting to break. Jasmine leaned in slowly, her fingertips grazing the base of the microphone. She didn't rush. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make it clear that she was in no hurry, that she understood the gravity of the moment. Her eyes never left Melania's face. The tension in the room was molten. Her voice, when it came, was calm and measured, yet laced with something sharp and unmistakably real. Well, Melania, she said, the slightest smile tugging at the corner of her lips, some of us didn't marry into our platform, we earned it with our voice. The words rang out with such clarity and precision, the effect was immediate. The audience gasped in one collective breath, followed by a spontaneous eruption of applause that swept through the room like a wave. Several people stood. The moderator's eyes widened as she glanced nervously between the 2 women. The other panelists looked frozen in place, caught between awe and secondhand shock. Melania's expression faltered for the first time. Her usually composed features twitched with something between disbelief and wounded pride. Her chin lifted slightly, and she gave a tight, brittle smile, but her eyes told the story. She'd been caught off guard, publicly and completely. The cameras captured the moment from every angle. Jasmine's calm defiance, Melania's stiff reaction, the standing ovation rolling through the crowd. It was the kind of TV moment that editors dream about, unscripted, raw, and impossible to ignore. Backstage, crew members could be heard whispering and exchanging stunned glances. The event's live feed on social media exploded within seconds. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag earned not given. Hashtag Crockett vs Melania, and hashtag that one line. TikToks were already being cut and posted before the applause had even died down. The microphone in front of Jasmine was no longer just a tool for speaking, it had become a symbol of defiance, earned respect, and a seismic shift in generational politics. Jasmine sat back in her chair slowly, completely composed, brushing a non-existent speck off her blazer like she had just finished a casual sentence, not a cultural takedown. The moderator tried to continue, her voice faltering slightly as she asked the next panelist a question, but the audience was still buzzing. Conversations broke out even while the event was still technically in progress. Journalists tapped frantically on their phones, some abandoning their notes entirely to capture real-time reactions. Political commentators watching from home began tweeting in disbelief, calling it one of the most iconic moments in recent political memory. Jasmine didn't say another word for the rest of the panel. She didn't need to. That single line had already changed the entire atmosphere. Melania sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't look at Jasmine again for the remainder of the discussion. Her occasional nods felt mechanical, her smiles rehearsed. She spoke one more time near the end of the panel, delivering a brief, vaguely gracious message about women supporting women. But her words felt hollow now, overshadowed by what had already passed. Her carefully crafted image of reserved elegance had, for once, been pierced by something authentic, by a truth spoken plainly and without apology. The closing remarks of the event seemed like a formality. People were still processing what they'd witnessed. Jasmine stood and thanked the audience with a graceful wave. As she exited the stage, she was immediately swarmed by a crowd of young women, many of them emotional, eager to thank her. Meanwhile, Melania made a quiet exit through a different hallway, escorted by aides who shielded her from reporters. The visual contrast was stark. On one side, a woman enveloped in celebration, on the other, a woman slipping into silence. Jasmine's one-liner had done more than win an argument. It had drawn a line in the sand between privilege and purpose, between symbolism and substance. And even as the stage emptied and the lights dimmed, the moment didn't fade. It replayed across phones, newscasts, and conversations around the country. It wasn't just about a clash of personalities anymore. It had become a statement, a reckoning, and a new standard for what political courage could look like when delivered in just 12 devastating words. Backstage, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the buttoned-up decorum of the panel itself. The production team scrambled to manage the overwhelming flood of calls, media requests, and notifications pouring in. Screens lit up with alerts from every major outlet, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, and even international platforms were already clipping and replaying the now iconic moment between Melania Trump and Jasmine Crockett. Cameramen exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispering to each other that they had just captured the moment of the year. Social media managers on site were glued to their phones, trying to keep up with the explosion of content being generated in real time. Hashtags like hashtag voiceovervows and hashtag earned not given were trending within minutes. The building buzzed with a chaotic energy, as if everyone suddenly realized history had been made in an unexpected flash of truth. Jasmine Crockett stood in a corner near the green room, still radiating the calm she carried on stage. Her team hovered nearby, a mix of awe and excitement etched on their faces. But Jasmine herself looked unfazed. She was laughing quietly with a young intern who had approached her hesitantly for a photo. The girl's hands trembled as she handed Jasmine her phone. "You said what we all wanted to say," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy for being loud about what matters." Jasmine smiled warmly, placed a hand on the intern's shoulder, and replied, "Never let anyone make you feel small for using your voice. That's how they win." More attendees trickled in, young women in suits and heels, many of them holding their phones up to show that their feeds were already flooded with tributes to her words. Jasmine took time with each of them, posing for selfies, exchanging words of encouragement, and making each person feel like they mattered. The sincerity in her presence was undeniable. It wasn't just about political theater, it was about representation. It was about being seen. And right now, Jasmine Crockett was being seen by millions as more than just a congresswoman. She was becoming a movement. Meanwhile, On the other side of the venue, Melania Trump exited quietly through a side hallway, accompanied by Secret Service and her communications staff. Reporters tried to intercept her with questions, but her team kept moving. No comment, one aide muttered repeatedly. Melania kept her eyes forward, her face unreadable, though tension pulsed in the way she walked. The media had already begun forming their own narratives, and for once, Melania had no carefully curated statement to control the storm. Her team quickly issued a generic press release calling for respectful discourse among women leaders, but it fell flat. The damage, or perhaps the revelation, had already been done. Newsrooms across the country were airing panel discussions dissecting the exchange. Analysts praised Jasmine for her composure, courage, and clarity. Feminist writers called the moment a cultural clapback for the ages. Political strategists noted that Crockett had delivered more than a viral quote, she'd drawn a clear and visceral contrast between performative grace and earned authority. Editorials flooded in, declaring Jasmine's one-liner the political mic drop of the decade. Meanwhile, conservative commentators scrambled to downplay the moment, calling it disrespectful or uncalled for, but the public wasn't buying it. The clip was being reposted by celebrities, activists, and even international figures. Oprah shared it on her Instagram with the caption, "When your truth is louder than legacy." That night, Jasmine returned to her hotel room, still in her blue pantsuit, her inbox overflowing with interview requests. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone, now blinking endlessly with new messages. Her team was still buzzing with activity in the adjoining room, but she took a quiet moment to herself. Then, without fanfare, she opened Twitter and typed a simple message, "I stand by every word." Platform earned. Within seconds, it was liked and retweeted thousands of times. The replies flooded in, women sharing their own stories, their struggles, their gratitude. Jasmine didn't need to explain or elaborate. The line she delivered earlier was already etched in the public memory. Across the nation, talk shows opened their next episodes with recaps of the panel. Late-night comedians turned the moment into monologues, and young activists began quoting Jasmine in protests, speeches, and college classrooms. It had become a cultural imprint. More than just a viral moment, it was a reference point. For years to come, it would be remembered not just as an insult and a comeback, but as a battle between borrowed prestige and self-made power. Jasmine had drawn that line, not with aggression, but with authenticity, and the world had listened. In homes across the country, women watched replays of the exchange and felt something stir inside them, validation, inspiration, maybe even healing. Mothers sat with daughters. Students shared it in group chats. Activists played it before rallies. That single sentence had traveled far beyond the panel stage. It had reached people who had long been told to quiet down, be polite, and stay in their place. Jasmine Crockett's voice told them otherwise. Not only could they speak, they should.